20th of April, year of our Lord, 1099.
Oh God, what am I going to tell the others? That our infallible leader has died? Or were there no obvious injuries on his body, besides of course the major burns he'd been seemingly unaware of not 2 days ago, simply walking out of the fire as though nothing had happened? God had replaced his missing skin. Could it be that God had not in fact protected him, as we all initially believed? But if that was the case, then the lance couldn't be real. If that was the case, then how could we have won the battle? None of this makes sense. And with the failure of the negotiations with the Emir Kerboga and the Byzantine abandoning us, we were outnumbered by over 2 to 1, and yet we emerged victorious. The only logical explanation must be that the lance protected us. How else could you explain members of God's army having seen ethereal soldiers riding beside them, as though God himself had truly sent his own army? No, the lance must be real. I remember fondly, having been one of your 12 chosen in your holy venture. Both you and Raymond, your most powerful supporter, as he was one of the Crusades' leaders, dug with us, but it was not easy work. And I remember after a day and a night, all 12 of us had grown desperate and weary. Our hope was beginning to wane in that small church. Even Raymond had dropped his shovel in frustration. And that was when you jumped into the pit and with your bare hands unearthed a piece of rusty metal. You had named the location before any of us had visited it, and while it was convenient that both the Church of St. Peter and the spear that had stabbed Jesus some 1,000 years ago were both in Antioch, I thought little of it, except for, of course, in my thanks to God and his grace for allowing such fruit to be harvested on our journey. In fact, when Bishop Adair claimed that he knew of another lance with authentication to the 4th century, we, your followers, asked that he show us this lance, and we might believe it. You would only go on to live a year after that victory. After that day in Antioch, you changed. You were showered with praise and commended for your role, rising high in the hierarchy of the Crusaders. You would always present it as a necessary exposure to gluttony, in order for your revelations to be heard by as many as possible. And I took your word for it, but soon I noticed that those began to change as well. Following the death of your most prominent naysayer, Adair de Roy, you told of him having visited you from beyond the grave, explaining that he was wrong about the validity and credibility of both you and the spear, and that he was suffering in purgatory for these heretical views. Now, while this appeased my ideology, I couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. And that was when you claimed that Christ had proclaimed you as being worthy to pass judgment on and distinguish the sinners amongst us Crusaders. And when those you identified started being summarily executed, I began to hesitate. It was those actions that eventually brought you to the fire I still see on you today. Now, this is not to say that you feared their judgment, for as men of God, we know that only he can judge us, something you, and us, your followers, had thought had already passed. Something I find only now conflated. It is this phase of your life I find myself questioning, wondering if this was always your end goal, that it was all a ploy to see yourself rise from a lowly pilgrim, searching for the promise of a conjured revelation in rags with his hands, to being surrounded by the wealth of power and the powerful wealth you now find yourself habituated with. Or found, rather. But I reject this. For even if your initial revelation was not but fabrication, without it, we may have been not but revelation for future agents of God. While your naysayers say that your vision and discovery meant little, I know that they were key in both encouraging the response to our dire situation and vital in stealing the nerves of our men. Now, there were of course other factors, but the fact that so many men discussed and praised your contribution is a point of merit that no one can argue. After all, you did give them a lance, genuine or not, that assured them of their victory. I have come to my own revelation, that whether or not you truly were God's vessel matters not. The Crusades had not only been ravaged by hunger, but disease and pestilence had spread throughout the group, and many were dying from this. As a result, many took to praying for God's salvation. So when you spoke of a resolution, it was all too convenient for us not to fall in line and believe to some degree. Even Adair stopped refuting your reputed vision instead letting those who wish to believe in the days just before the battle. In the end, decided I will tell everyone that though you suffered the burns waiting through the fire, it was the crowd that killed you. Being swarmed when you reached the other side of the fire by both zealous followers and believers, but also naysayers and non-believers, the violence of this welcome proved too much for you, and in the end, you succumbed to your injuries. Fear not, Peter. Bartholomew, you will be remembered.
Oh.